First of all, we must understand and recognize humanity in the other. We cannot, as society, achieve peace if we don't recognize each other as human. The main goal of a war is to dehumanize the other side and make you think the right reason, the race, for example, or your religion, it's the good one, and it's a struggle between the good and the bad. I think that we must overcome those concepts and embrace this challenge as a very complex process, you know? So I think that it's a must to achieve an harmonic society, to recognize each other, to recognize the truth that wields the other.
Where lust for a whole life and nothing but less makes people jump out of a comfortable pond into an unknown ocean. Welcome to that journey between the East and the West. Who says Rolling Stones don't gather moss? Hello everyone, I am Meenu Gupta, your host for the day, and I'm delighted to have you join me every week as amazing people share their incredible and inspiring life stories of straddling continents. Thank you. As the world grapples with ongoing wars in Gaza, Ukraine, and many other places, with a rising tide of authoritarianism and deepening global inequality, conversations around peace, justice, and international solidarity are more relevant than ever. Today's guest brings both heart and hands-on experience to these themes. I'm joined by Juan, Manuel, Tobar, Manzo, a seasoned Colombian human rights attorney, activist and academic who has worked extensively on peacebuilding, conflict resolution, transitional justice, and international cooperation. His work during Colombia's complex peace process offers insights not just for Latin America, but for any region struggling to rebuild after violence on a non-violent basis. We'll be digging into many questions, like what is it really like to heal a divided society? How can diplomacy help build the world's growing divides? And what can global actors learn from Colombia's journey towards reconciliation? This is going to be a conversation with a difference. So whatever you're listening, whether you're listening to on your commute, on a walk, or just taking a break from the news, thank you for being there. Let's get into it. And thank you, Juan, for being with us today.
Thanks a lot, Meenu, for your invitation. I'm glad to be here. Thanks to all of you who are listening us. I hope to contribute a little bit to start that flame of hope that it's hard to feel during these days.
Can you share a bit about your personal journey and what drew you into diplomacy and peacebuilding?
It's hard for a Colombian not be touched by the war. We are a very profound, hurted nation, and living in a place like Cauca department, one of the poorest and more violent regions of Colombia, it's very difficult to not be even determined by the violence dynamics and violent conflict. I feel that one of the things that made me realize that we have to do a struggle to change some things that were normalized, like the poverty, the lack of opportunities, and the armed violence must be have done, were to be involved since I was very child to social struggles from my family, my dad and my mom. I remember when I was in school that a couple of times my mom didn't let me go to the school to march and demonstrate with her. So that was a very profound footprint in my heart and soul. And that made me realize that I should carry on with this struggle. I think that my parents, my uncles who were killed, were the inspiration to get me involved in the peace building process.
So it's literally printed in your DNA.
I don't know if in my DNA, but in my principles and morals, it is. Yeah, I know that I carry with this tradition, and I think that all human beings must understand the duty that we have with the history and the duty that we must do something to change what must be changed.
Looking back at your early years in public service, were there any defining moments that shaped your understanding of conflict and reconciliation?
Yeah, one of the main ideas that people think about the conflict is that is always in two sides, perpetrators and victims. But the thing is not white and black. There are in betweens that must be understood to tailor processes, social and political processes, coherent with the context. For example, the victims of the armed conflict not were or maybe were not be always victims of the armed conflict, you know? Sometimes they become perpetrators too. For example, there are many cases of neighbors who point other neighbor because they had a conflict or a debt and tell the guerrillas they were paramilitary, members of paramilitary. The guerrilla killed the men that were pointed by the neighbor, and when they find out they were used like hitmans, the neighbor must be forced displaced to other side to safeguard his life. This kind of this example happens a lot of times and in many different ways. And it happens in the other way too. The people who in a moment could be perpetrators, they are victims of the armed conflict too. For example, the guy who was conscripted the boy who was conscripted when he was 15 years and becomes an adult inside the militias. What happened with these cases? You know, you are a child who are conscripted in a forced way, and then later on you become a perpetrator. You start as a victim of forced recruitment and you end being as a killer when you become a perpetrator. So these kind of processes are very complex. And in a society like the Colombian one, you must be very aware of this kind of processes that when you study this kind of stuff, they always put it in two separate poles. There are the good ones, the bad ones. Here the stuff gets relativized. Not all of us are good and not all of us are bad, you know? And I think that's one of the most challenge things to work in this kind of stuff we are working here in Colombia, you know, to deal with these different approaches and different contrast in all the histories and communities we work with. Yeah.
Thank you for putting it like that. I agree with you about the fact that nothing is black and white. It's not a bad person or a good person. It's what they do, which could be good or bad. But again, what is right and what is wrong is a matter of definition. What is right for one person may be wrong for another, which is also defined by many other factors. So it becomes a very complex situation for a family, for a community, for a country. And then when we have inter-country, what is right for one country may be wrong for another, may be seen. It's a matter of perception. So I'm glad you brought this out. Now, how would you, for example, there's an example which you just gave of a young child who's first forced into it and then becomes that. So when you have a situation like that, for example, that, how do you go about it?
First of all, we must understand and recognize humanity in the other. We cannot, as a society, achieve peace if we don't recognize each other as human. The main goal of a war is to dehumanize the other side and make you think the right reason, the race, for example, or your religion, it's the good one, and it's a struggle between the good and the bad. I think that we must overcome those concepts and embrace this challenge as a very complex process, you know? So I think that it's a must to achieve an harmonic society, to recognize each other, to recognize the truth that wields the other. Gandhi said that the conflict is an opportunity to present the truths. There is no one truth. There is many, and the opponent and the other side, maybe they don't have all the truth, and maybe we don't have all the truth. And it implies to recognize that the other has a part of this truth and must be presented. I am not without the other. My truth is not a whole, is not complete without the piece that has these other people that thinks really different than us. So I think that's the main challenge, to recognize humanity and recognize that the other, that they think different, like me, like us, has this part of truth too. And when we began to treat and feel each other as humans and all that it implies, the good and the bad things that it implies, maybe we have the opportunity and we are sowing the opportunity to understand and treat each other with dignity and respect. I think that's the main challenge right now as Colombians, and to overcome this polarity that divides our society right now.
Now, that has brought up a lot of thoughts for me. I can give you a myriad of responses to what you just said. And I'll begin with one: diversity. The day we are born into a diverse world because nature is diverse. And I'll just add to what you are saying. If you ask two human beings who've lived exactly in the same environment, and you ask them in different separate rooms to relate their experience of the same life, their storybooks would be very different, because how they experience life with their pair of lens with the eyes would be very different from another one. So it is one perspective from one person, another perspective from another. And as you rightly said, I'm just adding to what you just said. It's like when you want to see a picture, you move to different parts of the canvas to view the whole picture. When you just stand in one place, you only see only that part of the picture in that particular light. And, I always bring up this, I'm sure, humor me, apples and oranges. So, apples and oranges, both are fruit. They grow differently on different trees. They can exist together in the same food basket. Under pressure, however, they would react differently. They will decay in different time zones, and yet they can be happy in the same basket. So when I move in life, I tell people to be like apples and oranges and accept that there is an apple. An orange cannot expect an apple to squirt orange juice, suddenly develop and respond in the same way. So it's a matter of perspectives. I just expanded on what you said because I loved what you said, just added on to that. Colombia's peace process has been described as one of the most complex and ambitious in modern history. Now, what do you think made it uniquely challenging and uniquely hopeful?
Okay. One of the most challenges during the peace process was for the state and civil society. For the state was to co-optate the spaces that were built and legitimated by the armed groups in the periphery zones of Colombia, like Cauca. There are regions in Colombia and in Cauca that, for example, the armed group were the justice and were the power that determine at which time people cannot be in the street, what kind of music they should listen, and how the women should dress. This kind of parallel state were very rough in many communities. And for example, here happens stuff that seems crazy. Like, for example, some months ago, an armed group built a bridge to connect one community with the main road. An armed group built a bridge, something that must be done by the state. And this kind of unnatural, maybe, I don't know if this is the correct word to say to describe it, but this kind of stuff that at the first listen should be sound strange happened here in Colombia. So this kind of armed groups develop this state-like power. You know what I mean? And when they signed the peace agreement, the state must or should co-optate this kind of scenarios and this kind of power who were built by the armed groups in certain regions. The state could not do that. And right now we are living how other armed groups co-optate and try to control the communities and these spaces that were lived by the first armed group. That's what we call the reorganization of the armed conflict. That challenge was not achieved by the government from those years. The government of Duque didn't have the political will to develop the peace agreement, and that creates what we are living now in the regions. For the civil society, we had another challenge that was to embrace people who led the weapons. And it was very difficult because we were raising with a war discourse. All these 60 years, there were an enemy, a common enemy, and a common and public enemy who were the communist guerrillas. How we deconstruct common sense built around the war and aim the other. The other is the bad. The other is the one who came to destroy all this liberal and capitalist dream. What that says to us, what that gives to us, and how we as society face that challenge, It's what's very struggling, and we are keeping right now, when we are doing right now, the struggle to change that common sense built around the world. And that's it, It's hard for a society who lived 60 years in war, we keep living in war. It's hard to believe and talk around peace when we keep living in war. Yeah, it's a challenge that whole Colombia is facing now, the government, the state, and the people who are living the weapons too. What kind of society is receiving you? You are stopping the war, you are leaving your weapons, you want to be a peasant, you want to do all the things that war that didn't let you. You were one of the childs who were recruited, forced recruited. What kind of society is receiving you? Is an open arms society? Or maybe you are trying to be in a society who always see you as a criminal. That's the big challenge to all of us, to all society, Colombian society. And that's why talk about peace and think about around peace, it's a revolutionary act here. Because war and violence is the normal thing here. Sometimes people like us who think, talk, and work for peace, we are perceived as naive people. And I think we are not naive. I think we are brave because think in peace in this context it's for very brave people. The easy thing here is to go with the stream and revolve around their violence. So I think it's a struggle against the stream. Yeah. But here we are, and we are doing our best to do. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, and that leaves me with a lot of questions. As I understand, then, if I had to put it extremely plainly, breaking it down to layman's language for people in other countries to understand, and for myself to understand better, we are saying there are three sets of players: the armed forces, the state, and the civil society. Having said that, how did the armed player come into being? My question is, was it that the state was unable to carry out its function? As an example, you mentioned, for example, the bridge that was built. Normally, that would be an activity for the state, and now if it has been carried out by an armed body, whatever the reason, what could be the reason is the question. Was it lack of responsibility being taken by the state, or just a matter of power?
I think that happened because the state were used as a tool of the elite, the Colombian elites, to legitimate and to hoard money. And in this mission to hoard money through the state, they historically were not interested to make the state get in countrysides like Cauca, like where I live. And this is not something that I'm saying, it's something that happens historically. Right now, with the actual government, was the first left progressist government in the history of Colombia. So, because all the other progressive left leaders, the Colombian left leaders, were killed by the elites. The state, it is not good to say that the state didn't want to. The state could not get to regions like my region, like Cauca. It is better to say that the elites didn't want the state be in regions like Cauca. All these center peripheria dynamic were reproduced by the elites who coopted the state. So that's why, in this lack of state presence, the armed groups find an opportunity to control the community and control society. If you are the one who decides who is guilty, who is free, if you are the one who decides who lives, who dies, you are making a social control in these communities. Yeah, yeah. I think it was not like the state could not reach. I think it's better to say that the elites who control the state didn't want the state be in place like this. And with the state, we have to understand that here in regions like Cauca and many other rural regions of Colombia, we only know the state and relate the state with the presence of military. But is that the state? Where is the roads? Where are the hospitals? Where is the public health? Where is public education? Where is food? There is people dying, starving in Colombia right now. Where is the state over there? Yeah, you know? What do you ask for to communities who only knew the state by the rifle of a military, you know? And people in rural areas relate the state with military. The state is not justice. The state is no laws. The state is not public health. It's only military. Imagine how we change this common sense around the state in people who doesn't know the state. 60 years without a state.
And when you say state is equal to militia, but so are the armed forces, the other part,
Yeah,
which is
armed forces, legal armed forces.
yeah, and that is also so weapons are on both sides. If you are saying 3 out of the 3 players, 2 sides have the weapons, and both exercise fear.
Yes, of course. Fear is one of the main tools to maintain and use the power.
And the society then listens to whom? The state or the armed forces?
Sadly, the society gets in between, gets in between of this struggle. We always, civilians and civil society, we stay in between of them and their struggles. And right now, there's happened something very sad because in the previous years of armed conflict, there were a struggle, an armed struggle, a violent struggle between guerrillas and a state. And civil society and civil population were in the middle. Right now, we are living something different because there is no state in this conflict. There is an armed group and other armed group who puts the civil society and civil population in between. And it increased the lack of guarantees that we have as civil population because with the state, at least with the state, I have someone to claim my rights and the application of international humanitarian law. You cannot do that with armed groups. Right now, we cannot. Yeah, yeah. It's a very thought position. We are living now as civil society and civil population right now. The conflict is changing, but always has the same outcome. The people in between of the armaments.
And what role did international cooperation play in supporting Colombia's transition from conflict to peace? I'm saying that, but from what you, because that's what the world thinks. But from what you just said, there is really, the transition has not really happened.
Yeah, I think this is a duty not for the international organizations, and this is my totally my opinion, no? And but it's a duty for us as society and nation. There is a role, and of course there were and is happening a role of the international organizations here in Colombia, especially with the peace treaty. There were the accompaniment of many countries, very important countries, in this negotiation process. And in the beginning of the implementation, the international scenario, many international actors point their interest in Colombia. But the lack of government will to implement the treaty during those years, I think, made dissolve the interest of the international community in Colombian peace, because the international actors must not assume the duties of the Colombian state. So that's why many international initiatives around Colombian peace, I think they were not interested to assume that duty. And right now, I don't know how to read right now the international role. There is accompaniment with the United Nations and other cooperation, but sheesh, I don't know how to read it, you know? It's sad because at the international level, everybody thinks that Colombia is at peace, that the peace agreement between FARC and Colombian state cover and resolve this 60 years conflict, but right now, almost 10 years after, we're still in war, you know? So yeah, I think that the duty for us from the civil society and as a base ground association like the one I lead is to don't lose the hope. Even in the worst scenarios and even in this tough context, our struggle is not lose the hope and carry on building and achieving these small success and victories. Maybe, and I talk by myself, I stopped believing in these big goals like a Colombian in peace. I'm happier achieving these small victories in the community I live in my territory and the people I work with, you know? So yeah, I think that the challenge right now is to don't let the hope lose and disappear. Yeah. But again, with the international actors, I don't know how to read it. I have a very critic point of view about that. Yeah, as I told you, I don't know how to read it right now, because all this international legal frame is disappearing at the side, you know? Big states who sign the International Humanitarian Court, the Rome Treaty, are making right now a genocide at the plain side of the whole world. So I think the challenge is in the international actors are not here right now in Colombia, maybe, but it's in other places, you know. And because there is a before and after of what's happening right now in the Middle East, in Gaza. The whole legal international frame is tearing apart at plain sight. So yeah, I truly know that the peace in Colombia will not came by the international actors. I think that is something that we must assume as Colombian society. And that's the challenge, you know. That's why we work in Mambo International, and that's what we believe in Mambo International in all this. But there is still solidarity. And curiously, it doesn't came from the states who support Colombian peace. It many times came from other ground bases, grassroots movements. You know. Yeah, like we are doing right now, and Solidarity 2020 is doing this kind of connections. Maybe not with the states, but with the civil society, is what brings hope. This struggle, yeah.
So if I asked a question, and obviously now that will be a cosmetic one, it makes no sense if I ask you about transitional justice, which can be controversial, and that generally would heal a society, but that is really not happening. So that would be a cosmetic question, and I will erase that. Forget that I even asked that question, because we've not even come to that point.
But sorry for that, but I think, as I told you, there is not all white and black. And I really recognize the struggle we are doing and the state is doing with just transitional justice. I think is one of the most modern and holistic transitional justice frames in the whole world we are doing right now here in Colombia. Because I think that there is this will, there is this struggle to shift the way justice was perceived by the whole society. And I think that the special jurisdiction for peace, who was created by the agreement, and all these efforts we were doing as civil society, make more sense in this effort we are doing right now with the transitional justice. I think it's something that we must recognize. We must recognize, and as I told you, there is not all white and black. There is good stuff. There is some stuff to be doing better, to have done better, and there is something that we must not repeat here in Colombia. So yeah, I think special jurisdiction for peace and transitional justice, there is advancements here. For example, in the special jurisdiction for peace and transitional justice, just recognize Caucasus River as a subject of rights. Imagine that there is not only individual people, there is not only communities, there is a river with rights, a right wielder. And it's something hard to believe, even for myself, that I'm an attorney. But it's very interesting, this kind, and that's what happened when you put in dialogue the indigenous special jurisdiction and all this way to see the universe from our native cultures and native organizations in dialogue with the Occidental justice to perceive the justice. And those kind of advancements made me realize that we are thinking different, at least from justice, and it's very interesting what is happening here.
That is beautiful, actually. Not only interesting, because that puts a different framework on everything, because if rivers have rights, which is beautiful and which is so right, actually it sounded so right, nature has rights.
Yes. And we are recognizing nature and rivers as victims of the armed conflict.
That actually sounds very right. And I come back to something which you said, and you said actually the transitional justice is one of the most powerful which is taking place in the world. So what is so powerful about that, and what is different? What is it that makes it different? The recognition of rights of multiple players in it, or something else? Because obviously there is some element of it which you find powerful.
Yeah, I think that the holistic focus that has the transitional justice framework is new and very powerful because two main reasons for me. The first one is that it looks for not only the truth, but consequences from the actions, because the previous transitional justice systems, there were a bargain between the armed actors and the society. The armed actors who didn't want to be prosecuted and sanctioned, and the society who looked for the truth and historic memory. So if these first actors, the armed actors, hold the whole truth, they don't want to be prosecuted and sanctioned, because what's the point to make an agreement if I'm going to lose and be at jail or something like that? And the society still want to know the truth. Why happened? What happened? Because when this happened, where is my family? Where is the rest and the carcass of my family? And this, for example, in South Africa, there were not prosecution and sanction for the military. They all said, we are going to start over. Even one of the military become vice president. I don't know if they become a vice president or something, or achieve a high position in Mandela's government. I don't remember right now. But there were this bargain, Here in Colombia, we are trying to prosecute and sanction the people who commit crimes against humanity. And this bargain becomes even more complex, because this special jurisdiction for peace also prosecutes legal military persons that were member of the army, of the army of Colombia. So imagine for a military of Colombia be prosecuted under the same standards that is prosecuted a guerrilla member. So yeah, it was tough. It was tough for them, because they have all this honor and this barrier that tells them, I am not a guerrilla. I must not be prosecuted with the same focus, Here, this jurisdiction has the duty to do, and I think it's something very beautiful, because recognizing that the state is recognizing, we made crimes against the war against the humanity too. And it's something that didn't happen in other scenarios. The second characteristic is that they really put attention in the victims' participation. Actually, the victims is in the center of all this law frame, and the transitional justice doesn't only want to prosecute and sanction, but rather to repair the victims. And I think this new approach, not only to sanction, but repair and harmonize, is something that maybe can contribute to peace.
Question: if that is beautiful, which is very beautiful, when did it happen and how did it happen?
It's happening right now. And it's very interesting, because I work at accompany the creation to special jurisdictions for peace reports of Northern Caucasus communities and Cajibios communities. There were this opportunity that opens the special jurisdiction for peace to bring those reports and let the people tell them what happened. And right now, the special jurisdiction for peace is putting sanctions against military and guerrillas members. And I don't know how this will end, but I think it's a good stuff that we as society create this forum around the victims to know what happened, why did it, and what they can do to contribute for peace. So yeah, it's happening right now.
So is this happening because please correct me if I'm wrong, because of the uprising of the people or the awareness in the people and the grassroots movements who are increasing the awareness in the people, and that is leading to a bottom up approach that is leading up to an opening up of minds and increased power in the hands of the people?
Yes and not. I don't think it's something that just goes bottoms up. I think that it's a dialogue. Grassroots organizations, us, and this special jurisdiction for peace. Because in the traditional way, there were only the prosecutors who brought these discussions. The victim was put in a second role. Right now, the victims, we are in the first role. We are the participants in this dialogue. It's not something that only goes up, but it's something that flows between all these actors, And of course, do historic memory organize around the participations, dynamize the social fabric, and gives the opportunity to organize around a goal that is to achieve justice.
Do you think that this model, the Colombian model, it offers transferable lessons to other regions facing protracted conflict like Sudan, Palestine, or Myanmar?
I think all the transitional justice process must be tailored for each society and each armed conflict. I am not saying this focus, this Colombian transitional justice focus, will bring peace. I think it's a good effort. I think it tries to cover many things that other models didn't take in count. But at the end, as I told you, it's a challenge for each society to achieve its peace. There is not only one peace. There are many kind of peace, and each society must assume this duty. Maybe there are stuff that could be used in other scenarios, and I think I am glad that maybe our process served to inspire to resolve some doubts in other contexts, but each context has their own answers.
What are the biggest misconceptions that you think the international actors, players in the market, have about peace building in the global south?
I hope this answer doesn't bring me troubles, but it will sound weird. But peace actors and their common sense reproduce colonialism and subordination in our context. They came here thinking that what they plan in a desk in the northern or Europe or United States is the panacea, is something that will heal us, that will make us better, a better society, a more democratic society, a more peaceful society. And I think this was and continues being one of the biggest challenge for peace building missions in Colombia. And this kind of vertical and racist and colonialist way to perceive and relation with us grassroots organizations creates a lot of misunderstanding and conflicts. So yeah, there are a lot of to improve in this international peace building process. And the international actors should came to these territories in a humble way. It's not something that you must impose, it's something that you must walk and talk with us. There are not special recipes in peace building. You must understand and you must listen. Us who live here, who put our skin in the line of fire and came here in a humble way. I think that this sovereignty is this kind of, we are the international organization. You must do what we do, what we want. This way to implement peace building process where the interest of the international cooperant is the main interest and the community is becomes the second. It's not the way to that we must assume these processes, and that's what we try to subvert here in the organization we live, because we develop this critic way to assume the international cooperation. We try to put in the right place the center of all our accompaniment, not intervention, the society. We accompany, we don't intervene. Who are us to intervene, and who are you to intervene? I think that we must make an epistemological shift in this matter, because we are reproducing all this structural violence that brought us here. It's not free. It's not free all that had been done to let us where we are now.
That brings me to the next one, because people ask me this question. And rather than me, I would have somebody like you who are in the middle of it to answer this question. In a world where military expenditure is rising, I call it a trigger reaction. So in this world where people believe that violence can reduce violence, which I find a very strange way of going about it. But yes, if I had to say it in one line, how can you combat fire with fire, for example? I would use that metaphor. However, you are in the field and you use non-violent methods to arrive at transitional justice and to arrive at conclusions in peace building, because it is dialogue that you use as a tool. Now, how would you answer this question when somebody says that, hey, somebody attacks me and my family or my country? What do I do to defend myself? Let's say a country is asking that. Where do non-violent methods come here? You get my question. I've gone about this question in a very roundabout way.
Yeah, but I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer because here in my context, we keep looking for that answer. Maybe I'm totally wrong about the non-violence. Maybe I'm totally wrong about civil resistance. And who knows? I don't know if I'm right. I don't know if all this will have a positive outcome. But what I know is that is the right thing to do.
And why do you believe that?
Because I don't want to harm another human being. And I think that it must be a minimum to all of us. That's why I told you about the dehumanization. The main goal of a war is to dehumanize the other. She is not human. They don't deserve to live. And I think that nonviolence recognizes the humanity in other. And that's what makes me a nonviolent fighter.
In my language, that also makes a person a more developed person and a more wholesome human being, because one of the characteristics of a human being is the ability to think, process, and feel. And what puts an animal apart from a human being is the ability to decide, to respond instead of reacting. And in my opinion, unfortunately, in many places, in many developed countries, we are actually seeing a rise in reaction rather than a processed response based on what is my highest goal? Who am I in my highest way of being as a person, as a society, as a state, and as a country? How can I set a better example? What is my basis of power? Is that fear or is that justice and love? What do I teach the next generation? What is the legacy I will leave behind? And if, in my opinion, if world leaders in the developed, so-called developed, let me correct myself, in the developed countries thought of these questions, the existential questions, I call them, about who am I? And then came up with simple answers, we would be in a better place today. So there, I think you and I are on board. Now, if you could change one global policy tomorrow, you wake up tomorrow and you could change one global policy to support peace building efforts, what would that be?
In Colombia, to support peace efforts in Colombia?
In Colombia and other countries, because from the way you mentioned about transitional justice, there's a lot to learn from that example of Colombia. But in terms of the international scenario, because you are also in international relations, if you had to change one global policy at the way the world works, in general peace building efforts, with the way the world is doing peace building right now, what would that be?
The drug policy.
I
This
love that.
whole idea of the war against the drugs had as an outcome the intervention and the levels of violence we are living right now in Colombia. Because all this prohibition and negationism around the use of cocaine especially has led the armed conflict to be nurtured by the money who came from the drug distribution, the illegal drug distribution. And all these armed groups right now in Colombia, especially in Cauca, they are fighting for the routes to take out the cocaine. To where? To Europe, to United States. You know? And even right now, there are Mexican cartels taking Colombian territory to co-optate all these routes that the first armed group, the FARC, led because the peace agreement. So this ambivalent policy, international policy about the drugs, led Colombia to the conflict we are living right now. Because the drug problem, you will not resolve it denying it. You cannot do nothing denying it. You should resolve this problem with social policies, not with military taking out the coca plants, but changing those coca plants with legal products that can be given to the peasant population, to the indigenous and Afro-Colombian populations, dignity in their lives. So I think if we shift this international policy around the drugs, the government and the state could cooptate this market and dignifying it, taking out from the claws of the armed groups all this illegal economy. It will bring public policies to achieve strategies that gives opportunity to peasant workers to have a good life. I mean, I put this to you in perspective. A young man in Colombia makes daily $10 working in a legal crop, producing a legal crop. If he goes to the coca plantation and harvests the coca leaf, he wants like $40, 4 times what they will produce if he works in a legal crop. Imagine this. All this because it is an illegal, it's something illegal. If something gets prosecuted by the law, its price gets risen. You know, it's hard to, the dynamics of the market doesn't apply to this product. So that tears apart the social fabric that is needed to have an harmonic and a dignified life here in Colombia, because you start to thinking, and this young man gets connected to illegal economies, and the next step is to join to a legal armed group, you know? So all this, and in international level, around the drug war, many countries have legitimate their interventions in Latin America. Plan Colombia was one of the plans developed by the United States to fight against coca production. It didn't work. It only brings here North American bases and military support to keep struggling. 60 years later, keep struggling with the drugs. Operación Condor operations goes to Bolivia to fight against drugs production. Bolivia keeps producing cocaine.
A question then, are we saying... No, I get your perspective. And on one hand, the perspective seems legit, feels right. On the other hand, a question. We are saying if we legalize this product, let me call it that, more things can happen after that. Will not, amongst many other things. Okay, the good things, it may bring down the other operations, make the process legal. What could be the aftermath? If it is legal, will not the consumption of it increase? And the hands which can lay their hands upon 5 grams of it would want, okay, I'm okay with this is legal, I can just get 500 grams of it. Would that not happen? So it's just, and I'm being a devil's advocate here.
Yeah. What have taught us the prohibition is that if you prohibit something, it doesn't take out from the society. You know what I mean? In the 70s, in the United States, there were the prohibition of alcohol. The people keep getting drunk. So I think that legalization will not increase the consumption, but it will increase the power and the control that the governments and the states has on this substance. And we must assume that as a public health issue, not a security issue.
Got it.
Because assuming it a security issue brought us all this war we are living right now. You know?
That's a very good point.
If we assume this as a health issue, the duty for the governments and the states is to control their consumption. like they do with tobacco and they do with alcohol. Yeah, yeah. I think that we must, as a humanity, to take another focus on this kind of substances and what the prohibition had made us to societies like the Colombian one.
I think that's actually a good idea to reassess the label under which it is put and give due processes to that. That makes a very different way of looking at it when one looks at on a health basis, exactly what you said about tobacco. That's actually a very good thought. And finally, if how can individuals, no matter where they live, contribute to building peace in their own communities? That's your livelihood. How would
Yeah,
you say that to a person, that many people who would be listening in very different parts of the world right now?
I think that we must be revolutionaries, but not armed revolutionary. Instead, we should be ideal revolutionaries. I think that in all our contexts are happening things that should be changed. And you become a revolutionary when you change the stuff that must be changed. So many, and this is said by one Uruguayan writer, he says that many people doing small revolutions around the world can change the world. And I think that, and I feel it, I had feel it, that one revolutionary in all contexts is to light up, be a beacon of hope, be a beacon of change, and understand your privileges and transform those privileges in rights for all of one. Stand on, face on the things that are not just, and keep dreaming about tomorrow, a peaceful tomorrow. Keep that nurturing that dream and this utopia, because without hope there is no tomorrow, and all the struggles, violent and non-violent, are lost already. So yeah, find pleasure not in buying or consuming, but understand that working with others around a common goal is the way that led us as humanity to where we are right now. It's curious because all these common goals, all this idea of justice brought us here. And right now, the system, the economic and social system, is trying to forget us that we are here because of our community. We are not individuals, we are subjects of historic and economic conditions that made us who we are. And it's a duty, as I always said it, the history has a duty to all of us. We must be prepared and we must be aware of that.
Thank you. I think on that note, that's a very happy note to end it, because the idea, and I subscribe to the idea, if there is no hope, there is no tomorrow.
Yeah, we must believe it. If we don't believe it, no one will believe it for us. And even in the hardest conditions, like the ones who I live with my team and my territory and society, I think that it's very human not only to reproduce the bad stuff, but in the worst conditions, have space to dream and make peace. It's a coin. The horrible who can be the war, it's the scenario where the most beautiful and most human stuffs happen. And we must nurture that beautiful things that happen in between all these madness and sadness scenarios. So don't lose the hope. Don't let your arms go down and keep struggling.
Thank you, Juan, for joining me today and leaving us on that note, because it is a parallel to another philosophy where we say, a lotus grows in muddy waters. One can say, when one is in that situation, think yourself as the lotus.
Yeah, and be a revolutionary. Stand on against what must be faced, and don't let your voice be quiet. Point the injustice and fight for what is right. And what is right, it depends on your context, but all we know that there are just fights and struggles that must be held to not for you, your community, but the humanity, but the whole humanity. We're doing this for the whole humanity, because the peace of Colombia is the peace of the whole world.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing a piece of yourself with us today. Thank you for listening to the series Between the East and the West. Do subscribe to the channels mentioned on the site in case, of course, you liked what you heard. I am Meenu Gupta, the host of the series, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. We love feedback. Thank you once again. Namaste and bye-bye.